the biblical story of the flood, where God unleashed a flood that covered the whole earth, sparing Noah, his family, and 2 of every animal on this big boat, which is called an ark. And the waters eventually recede, and Noah and his family and the animals on the ark leave the ark, and God promises not to send another worldwide flood, using the sign of a rainbow. Now, this story has sparked theological debates, archaeological expeditions, and movies and even theme parks. And so the main question is, why? Why does God send this flood to kill all things on the earth? And so to answer this question, to understand why God sends the flood, we must grapple with a character that is often overlooked in this story. That is the Spirit of God. Because the life-giving power of the Spirit is vital for understanding why God chooses to send the flood, and also how God restores Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark. So this is a story about the flood, but this is also a story about the Spirit of God. And so why does God send the flood which kills almost everything on the earth? Well, to understand why God does this, we must first understand Genesis 1 through 3 and the overarching story that develops in these chapters. In Genesis 1 and 2, God creates the world, and he also orders it and assigns functions to everything that he makes. So God creates and then orders a perfect, harmonious world. But in Genesis 3, things go sideways as Adam and Eve bring disorder between God and humanity. This escalates further in Genesis 4, when Cain kills Abel, which brings disorder between humans. This disorder increases as in Genesis 6, the sons of God procreate with the daughters of man. And this represents a complete breakdown of the ordering that God had done in Genesis 1 and 2. The world is full of wickedness, evil, corruption, and violence. But this leads God then to say that his Spirit will not remain with humans forever, but rather he will withdraw it after 120 years. Now, it's unlikely that this is referring to human lifespans, as Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all live longer than 120 years. Rather, this verse is talking about a corporate humanity who, when the Spirit of God is taken away from them, will die. Now, this is fascinating as it shows us that the Spirit of God is associated with the life-giving and life-bearing force inside each human. Each person has something of the Spirit of God inside of them, which enables them to live. And in this period, we see God's heart is somehow connected with the fate of creation, as God's heart is troubled by the evil in the human heart. And so this story of the flood gives us a window into the very heart of God. With amazing boldness, the narrative invites the listening community to penetrate into the heart of God. What we find here is not an angry tyrant, but a troubled parent who grieves over the alienation. So many people ask, why did God send the flood? But this is not the question that the text presents itself with. Rather, we're not confronted with the flood, but with the alienation and the rebellion of creation from God. And Genesis says that God grieves, which is the same word used of the woman in Genesis 3:16 for the pain of childbirth. God is impacted by the suffering and the disordering of creation, that it grieves and it hurts God. And this all leaves us with a massive looming question. What will God do about this disordered and this dysfunctional creation? And how will God deal with it without completely destroying everything that lives? Why are people fascinated with the flood? So fascinated that they build full-scale replicas of Noah's Ark. like the ones we see in America, the Netherlands, and Hong Kong. I think that perhaps in a dysfunctional and disordered world, Noah's Ark represents an act of grace. That God does not completely abandon us, even when God is grieved at the evil in our world. You see, I see Noah's Ark as an act of grace. In the opening chapters of Genesis, we get this cycle of human sin, a pronouncement of judgment, and then the execution of that judgment. But what's fascinating is in between the pronouncement and the execution, God presents us with this incredible act of grace. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve sin. A judgment is decreed and they are expelled from the Garden of Eden. And in between the decreeing and the expelling, God makes garments of skin for Adam and Eve to clothe them. And this is an act of grace. Likewise, in Genesis 4, Cain kills Abel, is judged, and then is expelled from Yahweh's presence. But Cain is also shown grace before being expelled, as God marks him to preserve him from violence. Then we get to Genesis 6 and we find humanity's sin is overwhelming, which leads to God's judgment. But before the execution of this judgment, that is bringing the flood, God calls Noah to build an ark. That is, in this cycle of sin and judgment in Genesis 3 through to 6, Noah's ark is an act of grace. So once Noah finishes building his ark and he gets all the animals and his family onto the ark, we see that the flood waters come. And we get another little window into the Spirit of God in this passage. While earlier we saw the Spirit of God was the life-giving force within every human, here, when the floodwaters come, the Spirit of God is described as the life-giving force in animals as well as humans. As God takes the breath or the Ruach of life away. That is, God's Spirit not only enables humans to live, but is present in each creature on this earth. With God removing His Spirit from humans and from animals, bringing so much death, did the flood work? And are things different after the floodwaters recede? After the floodwaters recede, we get this incredible dialogue in the very heart of God. After Noah builds an altar and makes a sacrifice to God, Genesis 8:21 says, "The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, 'Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done.'" Now remember that the evil in the heart of humans is the thing that prompted God to bring the flood. But now after the flood, evil is still in the heart of humans. All the terror and the death of the flood has not changed humans or their hearts at all. And we should also note that this passage indicates that there is a reversal of the curse that was put on Adam and on Cain. For Adam, the ground is cursed and will produce fruit only through painful toil. For Cain, the ground will not produce any fruit at all. But here, God says that the ground will no longer be cursed. So humanity still has evil in its heart, but the curse on the ground has been lifted. So the change does not come in humans or in their role. Rather, the change comes in the heart of God. God promises to never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done. That is, God chooses to engage with creation in a different way after the flood. And so the change that the flood brings is not in humanity, but rather the flood affects a change in the very heart of God. And so this leaves us with a question: when does this change occur in the heart of God? Now, scholars usually point to Genesis 8 verse 1, which states, "But God remembered Noah and all the wild animals and livestock that were with him in the ark, and he sent a wind over the earth and the waters receded." Fascinating here is that it says that God remembered Noah and all the animals on the ark. Now, in remembering Noah and the animals, it states that God sent a wind, which in Hebrew is Ruach. And God sends this Ruach over the earth to push back the waters and bring forth dry ground. And here we have the final mention of the Spirit in the flood narrative. Much like in Genesis 1 verse 2, where the Spirit of God hovers over the waters of the deep, here God sends a Spirit over the waters to bring forth a new creation, which we see unfold in Genesis 8 and 9. So the Spirit of God in this flood narrative is not only the life-bearing force in humans and in animals, but it's also the means by which God brings forth a new creation by saving Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark. Now, to grapple with the parallels between creation and the flood accounts, and the central role that the Spirit plays in both of these narratives, you need to better understand the role that the Spirit plays in Genesis 1 and 2, which I cover in this video.